And now I'd like to welcome you back to the afternoon portion of our program when we turn to considering ornament, which has so often been relegated to the rubbish bin. So I've been told. Our first speaker is Renata Holod, who of course needs no introduction, and yet I will attempt anyway. Renata Holod is the College for Women class of 1963 term professor in the humanities in the History of Art department at the University of Pennsylvania, and also the curator of the Near East section in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology here as well. She received her BA in Islamic Studies from the University of Toronto and did her graduate work in the History of Art at the University of Michigan and Harvard University. She has done archaeological and architectural field work. It would be easier to say where she has not done it. Widely traveled. And her most recent project is a collaborative study of the grave goods of a Kipchak kurgan in the Black Sea steppe of the 13th century. Please join me in welcoming Professor Holod. Today her talk is called Copying the Qur'an.
And I should just add, thank you very much for the introduction, that this excursus into manuscripts is a completely new thing for me. I've excavated, I've worked on modern architecture, et cetera, but having been appointed as curator in the University Museum, which was not immediate, I decided to have a look at what we have. And this is actually the product of two seminars. One, a undergraduate seminar, which we have in the History of Art department, where we just said, okay, we have this thing, let's just have a look at it. And two, then followed by an undergraduate seminar as well. So I learned as much as my students, I think, because I am not a manuscript person. So that's a caveat. The second one is copying the Qur'an. Well, we'll have a look at that momentarily. Now, this is what, forward? This way, yes?
Are you on the keyboard?
This is this one, yes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay.
One can approach the Qur'an in many different ways. And I'm just going to lay out, before getting to the codex itself, the fact is that it is supposedly copied and signed by a certain person who calls himself the Katib, Mahmud ibn Hussein al-Kirmani. And he says that it was copied in Hamadan, which is northwestern Iran, and the date is given as well. So is this actually true? Just because something is written doesn't mean it's true. But before we get onto this, in this period, which is starting from the 10th, 12th, 13th century, we have a lot of things that are signed by their makers. And they come in all different shapes and sizes. So I thought I would really go for, look at this. Here's a ewer, or some sort of automaton. And it's in the shape of a cow that is being attacked by a feline while there is a calf sucking. Okay. And it says, this cow, calf, and lion were all simultaneously made, I can't read the rest, on the order of Ruzbah ibn Fahridun ibn Burzin, blessings to his owner, Shah Burzin ibn Afridun ibn Burzin, and the work of Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Abu Qasim, the decorator. So did he cast it? No, he calls himself Nakash, decorator. So that's one thing. And here is where the inscription is. And then here we have another inscription. So part of what we are already dealing with is that people who deal with manuscripts have to look much wider and broader because the makers are making other things as well. And they sign their names. Here's somebody who signed a large basin, made by so-and-so and so. I'm not going to bother telling you. Everything is inscribed, and the maker is front and right there up front, I did this. So no false humility. Then we also have a number of manuscripts that are more or less contemporaneous with this Qur'an that I'm going to be talking about, as for example, a copy of the Maqamat sessions, where the copyist and the painter, a certain Yahya ibn Wasiti, assigns his name. So we know where it is. It's in Bibliothèque Nationale, and it shows a library. That's actually really interesting and important for us. And there's another copy in Petersburg. And here you have the same copy in the Bibliothèque Nationale, where Abu Zayd is thanking the Qadi of Syria while his wife looks on. And I've always thought that her boots were absolutely terrific. Okay. But now, returning to this thing that we have, and here it is, unbound. It did not come to us with its original binding. And we also know that it has not, and in fact, the front matter is also a problem. But as I'll show you, we have also an inscription that I'll talk about in a minute, but it also says that this was given as a pious foundation, but a certain Amir Ahmed Jawish, and we know who he is. And so at some point or another, it was in Cairo. So here is the part of the front matter. It's not the complete thing. This is actually only part of it, but this is the inscription of the pious foundation in really, really ugly calligraphy, in really gloppy black ink, but there it is. It's right on top, and it says Pious Foundation Waqf, and it gives you the name of everybody. Okay. But what's even more interesting is the double-page frontispiece, the right part of which is reproduced any number of times, including the Pelican book on early Islamic art. But what one doesn't realize is, the other page is never reproduced because it's not in very good shape, right? It has a whole center that's fallen out. But we have a colophon with the name of the calligrapher, the date, and the place of copying. And here it is. So, wrote and gilded, all right? So, Mahmud ibn Hussein al-Khatib, the secretary, al-Kermani, wrote and gilded it. And at the bottom, you have in Jumada, and you have the date. That's Hijri. Okay. In Hamadan, may God protect it. And then this reads on the bottom. And then thanks be to God, Lord of the two worlds, and blessings on Muhammad, his kith and kin. And if you look at the lower image carefully, you'll see that, wait a minute, this is not in terrific shape. Well, in fact, the frontispiece is pasted and in bad shape. But before I go on there, this is where Hamadan is indicated by the red arrow so that you can find where you are and at what time. This is the time when the Seljuks are the Turks are entering into the then Islamic world and taking over from the top. They were on horses, and therefore they had power. Okay. The many different aspects of this manuscript were interesting, and it wasn't until I decided to learn something about it by actually teaching a course. Actually, it's a very useful thing. You teach well, you learn. That, for example, compasses were used to make the center of the frontispiece drawing. And here you have, and you can actually see the holes where they were inscribed. We have lots and lots of damage and retouching. And here you have some, and here you have more, and you have more. And so this poor thing has really gone to the wars. including just these ones that I've highlighted. I'm not going to spend very much time on it. Then, when you actually look into the surahs, you'll find that, well, things are looking rather strange because, for instance, this, oops, what did I do? Help? What did I do here?
That same button.
Oh, here we go, okay. Anyway, so the surah, the beginning of the surah marker, as you see, well, it's looking, very strange. And then, of course, the title is a problem because it begins revealed, nazalat, and then the middle of it, which gives you the name of the surah, is really not good at all. So I began to think, wait a minute, this is something is not right here. And it turns out, when you actually look at it more carefully, that it's cannibalized from exactly the front matter. All right? And pasted on paper. But before we get to this, let me then explain what we've done with this very careful analysis of this. We know how the manuscript was laid out. We know the processes through which it was copied, and even, in fact, the full details. So first, so reading from right to left, 1, 2, 3, 4, you will see that finally the bottom right one, it has this red text. What is this? So then you plunge into the question of, well, you have a copy of the Qur'an, but then you also have interlinear Qur'an commentary. Well, fine, I know we went to look at commentary, but surprise, it's not commentary. It is the most stupid repetition of nothing. So it's just exactly that. And why is it? First of all, it's in red ink. Why is it there? Well, so for example, when it says Qala al-Rasul, so said Muhammad, and underneath in red it says Muhammad. Like, what other? Anyway, you understand. So first of all, having prepared myself for this great battle with, the myriad of Quran commentators, I am faced with not a commentary. So the question of, but paleographically, the writing is exactly of the same time. Okay. But going back now to the front matter. Here, I don't have time to really get into it, and we're publishing it. I mean, all of my students together, this is coming out, I hope, very soon. See, here are the repairs. And first of all, if you look at the surah markers, those little medallions that you see here, you'll find that something's wrong with them. And also the paper, it's crooked, for one, okay? So here, and so lo and behold, what you see here is that the surah marker here, this medallion, is actually not. It actually comes from exactly the same page from which the other thing had been cut out. So now, looking at all of this, sometime along the long life of this manuscript, they cannibalized the front matter somewhere to fix this. Okay. And then I draw your attention to the middle of the lower, right below the line. And here you see something else. That's just a patch. And it comes from probably a surah heading, but pasted on because there was a hole. So no, let's just manage that somehow. Now but the regular text looks like this. So, and you see the red so-called commentary, which is completely idiotic. Don't have time to really get into this, but it's really. But So every surah, every verse ends with a little medallion. So one of my students actually did an entire typology of medallions. And it turns out that despite the fact that Mr. Al-Kermani, the secretary, said that he copied all of it, he did not, okay? And he certainly did not put in the surah markers. And there's more. And what we also see is that in some cases, and I think I did not show you this, if you look at the middle line, there are all kinds of additions. Right? Okay. And this one all the way in the margins. And then further, you notice that there is a frame, and that frame, I can tell you, does not belong to the time of the copying of the manuscript. It is a feature of 14th century manuscript production, 14th and later manuscript production. So more surah markers and more surah markers, and we've now developed an entire typology. So there is somewhere a specialist that only does surah markers. Here's another, and another, and then somebody comes and corrects. And I don't know whether you see this between the lines. That is extremely bad writing. I mean, really bad calligraphy. But then comes the question, was the Quran copied by sight or by sound? Did they dictate it, or were they copying like this? Because the change in the mistakes that are made by sight and sound are actually quite tremendous. So this one was by sight. So they were copying and they missed. So sometime later, along the life of this book, somebody went and said, wait a minute, you missed such and such. And they just plunk it in there. Okay. Now, let's look at other features. So we also did a study of, here's a surah marker, you see it just on the bottom, where you have several parts of the process. You have a gilded square. Then you have the blue lapis, okay, color. And then finally you have the marker, the actual drawn in. Okay. The upper part of the manuscript, I don't know whether you can actually see it, has later paper. And lo and behold, it's actually Venetian Tre Lune paper. So you have a paper that obviously is dated when the manuscript is dated, but then at some point or another, it underwent yet another fixing, and that was probably in Cairo. By this time, in the 18th century, Venice is a great exporter of paper. They didn't make paper in Venice, but they were in there being commercial. Okay. Here's just a page. I'm not going to get into much of it, but to show you that in addition to this, we also have markers. If you see the one that is circled, a kind of a straight thing that actually has to do with the reading of it out loud. So there are breathing marks there. So you read, and then boom, and then you go on, and it's very carefully marked onto this as well. Okay. You can see on the far one that this one is actually pasted onto Venetian paper. You see the bottom where the earlier paper is, and then the rest is just a frame. Okay. Okay. Moving on. The person who gave this as a pious foundation to the Al-Azhar marked up saying this is a pious foundation in really bad script. Here's another example, which I've circled in green, saying, this is a pious foundation, nobody can touch it, and here, and here, and here, and here. So how is it that it got to Philadelphia? Okay. Okay, that's a whole other question of buying, selling, and what have you. But to me, what's interesting is this is actually a heading of a surah that in pretty good shape. So first of all, on the two sides, it tells you that this one was revealed in Mecca, and it gives you the name of the surah in between, and it's beautifully finished. Everything is fine. So, okay, but that's probably not normal for this manuscript. So despite the fact that the finispiece says that it was finished, right, the surah markers are actually not all finished. So therefore, the process of copying the Qur'an by sight, making mistakes, leaving out lines, is contemporaneous with the making of the finispiece, where Mahmud al-Kermani says that he did it, right? Meanwhile, and we did a very careful study paleographically, we know that there are at least 4 hands in the actual copying. Now, what to do with this? So here is a surah that supposedly was revealed in Mecca, and it says so in the two sides. But the middle is crappy, awful, because it's actually pasted on later, probably in Cairo. Okay. Here's another example where they lay out, and notice that there's no rhyme or reason where you actually put the surah markers. If you come to the bottom of the page, almost the bottom of the page, you start immediately. You don't say, no, this is not going to look good, we're going to start somewhere else. There you are. And, well, there is no room. Well, we'll just make a little indentation in what is a perfectly good surah marker. We'll move on. Okay. And so the very next line is already the beginning of the next surah. Here, well, here's again, though on the sides it says very clearly that this was again revealed in Medina, the middle is added. It's terrible. It was so here again, just a careful examination of these locations can tell us that the expert illuminator was not around to do the middle, or did not finish it, despite the fact that Mr. al-Kermani says that he finished everything. Okay. And then the rubbing out is basically somebody tried to rub out the fact that this is a pious foundation. Okay, I'm not going to bother with this. Okay, paper. The entire question of what is paper, when is it actually, when does it get currency? We know for a fact that the production of paper in Islamic lands, the Persian word for it is kagaz, the Arabic word is warak, is part and parcel of daily life. At some point or another, people stop using parchment, i.e. vellum. Just don't do it. So early Qur'ans are on parchment. But by this time, by the 12th century, they're not. And in fact, if you look around carefully, you'll see that, well, what's the earliest possible one is probably a century earlier. So that's another whole question that, and everybody uses paper, and you don't actually use parchment as such. Okay. And here's the Trelune paper, which is perfectly good. You'll see the Trelune there very clearly. Now, in what kind of script is this written? So part of the study of calligraphy is essentially learning how to recognize various types. So we know that a certain Ibn Bawab died in 1032, was taught by the daughter of Ibn Muqla. Ibn Muqla is the one that invented, supposedly, this proportion script, in Arabic called Khat al-Mansub. And here you have it, and it looks like this. And this is actually a Quran copy by Ibn Bawab, which is found at the Chester Beatty today. And the way in which you know that this is proportioned is these little rhombs are actually the mark of the pen. So how you cut your pen nib gives you the size of the the whole proportion. And then the proportion of that then is further proportioned into the layout of the entire manuscript. So now to go back to our Qur'an. Well, it's lined up pretty well. And the reason is, you see that very well, right? Everybody see the lines, right? It's because there is something called a mastara. And here we have one here that is actually later, but it's the same idea, that you actually make it with string and then you actually press it over the paper. So there is the right side and the underside. You see this very clearly again and again, what you have to, so that the lines are absolutely straight. Okay. There is also the question of layout. So here, for example, the height of the surah heading is 1, and then all of the other lines are essentially in relationship to it, as are the actual medallions that give you the 5, 10, and 20 numbers of the surahs as you have them here on the line. Okay. Behind all of this is a bunch of instruments, and I thought I'd just show you this because actually we have it here at the Penn Museum, excavated at Ray, which was the second capital to Baghdad, and where the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology actually excavated. So this comes from an excavation. So these would be dividers, but these are exactly the kind that are used to make, the indentations on a page so that you can then do whatever else you need with them. And I invite you, if you are still staying, to go and have a look at the Middle East galleries. The third gallery has the Ray material. Okay. So here's the Chester Beatty, which of course utilizes all of these circles, intersecting circles again and again. So our Qur'an is not that far away from it. And here are other examples of this, more or less of the same period. On your right is the Freer-Sackler Qur'an that they bought in 1929. Our Qur'an pretty well came into the collection more or less the same in the early 20s. And you see that the surah markers, this is a much larger paper, are also of the same sort. And in fact, the proportion script is very, very similar. Except what it doesn't have is it has no stupid commentary in red. It's just clear. Okay. We also have examples that really, went through the wars. Here's one that the Met just recently got, where you see actually two parts. The ones that are gilded and in color are pasted onto a page that is subsequently completed. So you actually have fragmentary Qur'ans that are redone, okay, in order to be used again. These were absolutely fascinating, the way in which these are treated, okay? Okay, I think, and I think that, I don't know how I'm doing for time. I just wanted to look at some other issues. One, why did Mr. Al-Kermani decide that he needed to sign it? Well, because he was head of the workshop, clearly, and because there is an entire tradition of signing, your stuff. So here, for example, is a cup made in Damascus at such and such a time. Here is another one. We have signatures galore on everything. Everybody signs their name. Why? Because craftsmen are literate. Okay. And I think I'm going to finish here. I invite you to go and look at the Middle East galleries. This is actually something else that you will see that is music making. And I'm done. Thank you.